I'm going to do a little short talk right at the beginning that has to do with noticing. So I'm just going to, and it's something I wrote for another panel, but I'm just going to redo it now. The other day, while on my way to where I work at the Alberta College of Art and Design, from the second floor to the fifth floor at the college, I rode on the elevator with 3 students. During that ride, in their animated conversation, I noticed they said the word "like" 153 times. I counted. I have no problem with this expression or its frequency. It adds quotation marks and commentary to the phrases it precedes, and like many things in nature, it is puzzling and fascinating at the same time. I've heard complaints about its use, you know, the younger generation and all that, but the use of this word has actually been around for a long time. The hippies used to say it. Like "Wow Man" describes almost perfectly what it was like to be in a psychedelic haze. The beatniks used it too. Like "Crazy Daddy-O, I dig it," which means like crazy Daddy-O, I like it. The Brits have another version of the sentence breaker. They would say "sort of" or "kind of." I've heard it said with the same frequency. It just takes longer to say. But I imagine these kind of things go back even further, like all things do. I have a particular fascination, and that is that all of the avant-garde strategies of the 20th century, you know, automatic drawing, where one just begins to draw without a particular goal in mind, automatic writing, which is done in the same way only with words, just start and see what gets written, the cut-up, where you take a page or pages of text and cut them up, throw them in a pile, randomly pick a fragment and attach it to other randomly chosen fragments and see what you get. Maybe poetry, maybe gobbledygook. Frottage, decalcomania, all of these tactics employed by the surrealists, the dadaists, the beats, the fluxists, etc., etc. These were all Victorian parlor games. Every second or third generation, these things are not rediscovered, but discovered afresh as if they had never happened before. So the future is found in the past. As an aside, I want to briefly mention a little known fact about the business that has made immediate use of every new visual technology since the beginning of time: the porno industry. As soon as there was a way of fixing an image on paper or film, there they were. And they weren't there specifically because of the content. They were there because of the money. Lust has no object like money. So there were pornographic daguerreotypes, pornographic tintypes, pornographic flip books, silent porno, porno talkies, porno video, porno 3D, and of course digital porn. However, there is a snag. The porno industry ran into a huge problem with high def. And the reason? Get this: too much detail. Nonetheless, there is an enthusiastic user of greater and greater detail, and that is the horror film industry. Apparently, incredible detail is absolutely horrifying. Now, back to the matter at hand. There are myriad reasons for making photographs. I'm not a photographer. I'm not even an amateur photographer. I take pictures of paintings I have made of family and friends, which I happily add to my iPhoto library. Here are a few images that I've taken that I think are successful out of the thousands that I have taken. Now, this was taken on a trip through southern Alberta. From the same trip, on a side street in a small town, my truck in their living room. A shot taken from the balcony of a Toronto hotel. This is exactly as I found it in a bookstore in Salmon Arm, BC. And it says nonfiction too. I actually had to ask the guy who owned the bookstore if I could come back the next day with my camera and take the picture. He said yes. Early one evening, I stepped outside of my studio, which is in an old fire hall, and this is what I saw. I think what motivates me to take these kind of pictures, when I do take pictures, is the noticing. I'm held by what I notice or what I am made to notice. But even without a camera in hand, I have a passion for noticing, and I have a fetish for things photographic, although not necessarily for photographs. For instance, I have made numerous camera obscuras and have never made a fixed image in one. I've only been interested in the device as an experience chamber or as a theater. And if I notice a reflection in a lake or in a puddle, I see this as a kind of photography. If I see a shadow of a tree on a wall or on a patch of ground, I see it as a photogram. These are moments when the image is fixed, however briefly, by nature's promiscuous use of what I am calling the photographic. This may not be technically or semantically accurate, but I don't care. This conceit has heightened my sense of noticing. And further to this, I am particularly interested in the photographic as code. In much the way as we identify a painting as being an abstract or a realist work, there's a category of appearance that states that something is photographic. Detail is nature's rhetoric, and the photographic code is possessed of this rhetoric. For the past 15 years, I have played with this notion that if something appears to be photographic, then it is, and I have developed a deep interest in finding ways of simulating this code in my painting and drawing. This is an ink piece. Actually, it doesn't really show along the edges. I need a better photograph of it. But it's, actually, I think I have this in my other slideshow. In 1996, I was fortunate enough to spend the better part of a week with the great American writer William Burroughs, who had taken up painting 10 years before. He told me that he couldn't draw a straight line, but what he did was physically move paint around until he thought he recognized something. It might be an image of a street in Tangier where he had lived for years, or a familiar face, or the sudden appearance of some aliens. And this is a painting of his that's on the brochure. But as soon as he noticed an image, he stopped. The painting was finished. Click. Picture taken, like a kind of photography. It has been said many times before, there is no past and there is no future, there's only now. But sometimes there doesn't even seem to be any now when that delicious pleasure of noticing takes over. So, briefly, what I want to say about this exhibition in here is that Ihor, I was visiting the Shaw Festival where my wife is choreographing a show last year, and Ihor asked if I would come by and look at the vaults. And so I went through, we spent about 7 hours looking at work, and Ihor surreptitiously paid attention to what I said wow at, and took note and sent me a whole bunch of images and asked me to curate a show out of those. And this show is what was the result of that. So first I'm going to go zip through some slides of my own work, and then we'll take a walk into here. And I'll keep an eye on the time. Okay, when I'm usually talking at a college or a university to students, I usually show work from my student period. So this is a second-year painting. I studied with a guy named Frank Viervoort, and he taught me a method of perceptual painting, which has been of the greatest use to me. I'll have to read some of these because they're a little bit blurry. 2 smudged yellow 2s in a bright light. In the summer between my 3rd and 4th year, I was lying on the beach and I imagined this format with the image delivered, or an image and a description of the image delivered at the same time. A mystical 7, an ink splash, and an ordinary 7. A pink alpha and a green omega in front of a magic art reproducer. And this is my first plundering of pop culture. A found image. 3 colored brushstrokes on a picture of a mountain. And one other element that has lingered in my work, which is that the canvas as a window and the canvas as an object. So you sit on the surface with the illusionary space behind. And this one, a great lesson for me by a painting instructor I had. I painted the cartoon, and I put a white spray bomb over that whole area, then bolted these on. Showed the instructor, he said, go back in and occasionally some of these that are sort of silvery looking, paint them the color they are. And I did, and it changed the painting entirely. It was it integrated everything there rather than being like a cheese sitting on a cracker, or that sort of one thing on top of another. This is how I was taught not to paint a portrait in first year anatomy. Moon and no moon, and some objects. And I'm going to zip through some of this stuff because we have a shorter time. Some early drawings right out of art college, iron-on from a Women's Day magazine, and pencil crayon drawings. Orange Julius. Sorry, Ihor. A trick my father taught me, which I can still do. This was, I had a landlord who wrote his own books, published 3 at a time, leather bound, and when he moved away, he left a box of printing blocks by the garbage can, and I grabbed them and let them invent their own story. So there's a house, horse and buggy, boat. There's my landlord playing his accordion, and a girl by a Christmas tree, and I just scribbled it, took a green pencil crayon and scribbled it over whatever she was holding. Some boxes. This one you could roll the silver balls around and get them in the eyes. My son, who was a month and a half or a year and a half old, did the scribble on this one. This was a lithograph of George Washington, and I got a brown pencil crayon and turned him into Picasso. And then when I was in art college, because I had 6 kids, I needed to make extra money, so I began doing portrait commissions. And this is, I never liked doing them because it was more like a job than fun. And this guy wanted his family crest in the corner and the Alberta crest on his tie. And he was paying. What? Now this was I was commissioned to do this by a golf club, and this was a guy who was moving on, and they wanted a portrait of him, so I did this portrait. And some friends of mine in a band from BC came in, they just started laughing, and I said, "What?" And anyway, I never heard any more from the golf club. I guess they gave this to him, but I realized there were some great painters in the past who had sort of done similar things. Velasquez, for example. Anyway, this is a painting. It was for a Stride Gallery benefit, and I took a board 1 foot by 4 foot and painted down one end just a head-shaped space, and it's printed "Your face here," and whoever bought it or bid the highest got their face put there. This is the guy who bought it. And then I figured it was time to get on with my own career, so I began a series of self-portraits that got things established for me. Charcoal drawing, hand with a spray can, yes, for a painting called Self-Portrait with a Large Audience, trying to remember what Carmelita Pope looked like. And Carmelita Pope was a woman who would come on the TV and say, "Hi, I'm Carmelita Pope," and she was selling that spray-on grease called Pam. Oh. And I always, as a kid, I always wondered, why would she think I know who she is? So really, this is a painting about me having a large appreciative audience for my most trivial of thoughts. Self-portrait, watching a man about to shoot himself in the foot. I want you to know that you're the only audience who's laughed at that for years. Usually this is the one that the place falls silent. Charts. And these are all, so the figures in all these are about life size. Large paintings. Self-portrait with the combat nymphos of Saigon. This is taken, the image itself is taken from a Stag magazine, 1965. This was I had to move the guy who's being shot over just on the other side of my head because my hat was in the way. So that's all done with gesso and tinting, and my figure is done in oil paint and it's varnished, so it's ambiguous as to whether I'm in the picture or running up to a picture. And it was a great lesson in readership for me, because when this first showed in the late 80s, somebody else who taught at the art college stopped talking to me for 2 years because of how women were represented in it. Another person I knew told me that I should destroy the painting because of how women were represented in it. Somebody else I knew put it on the cover of her magazine as a wraparound, and she said that these are, the message here was that these are powerful women, and even though I'm sympathetic, I'm not much help. And the fundamentalist minister told me that he thought it was a religious painting. He said that the message was, even women who are so poor they can't afford clothes can help us fight the they can help us fight the godless commies. Okay, self-portrait with an amaryllis, self-portrait as an axe murderer. It's not really what it's called, but I always thought, you know, you're sitting doing a self-portrait for a long time, your face kind of gets grumpy looking. This is the largest of the paintings. This is 9 feet wide, and it's called Self-Portrait Just 2 Mouths Down from Some Guy with a Goddamn Tea Cozy on his head. Self-Portrait by Max, Self-Portrait in a Tuxedo by Max Beckman, 1929. Self-Portrait as Max Beckman. My face in your home. It's a beautiful painting. Self-portrait with tweed jacket and smooth hair. Charcoal drawings. This is Carmelita. Carmelita, that was a preparatory drawing for an etching called Miss X. That was using a letraset. X's, a whole sheet of letraset, and Carmelita with a gold tooth. Large charcoal drawing called Conversation, taken from Dr. No film, a James Bond film. This is looking back at the Colonel, and The Kiss with James Bond, and James Bond stretched, and all kind of working up to a painting called Self-Portrait, Temptation of a Saint. And James Bond with a tarantula on the pillow from Dr. No. And I was interested in a notion of losing one's sense of oneself in the experience of the world. So the glare from a TV on my face far outshines that pathetic halo. Here's 3 of my children in a large portrait called Family. We were the followers of Nostradamus. And there's a whole thing about looking up to off to the upper right. Roland Barthes wrote about it, and it was used in Russian social realist paintings, American social realist paintings like that. Off to the future. Double self-portrait, wanting to know what I'm doing home so late. Based on the ubiquitous cartoon that was all around in the 50s and 60s, the husband coming home late and he's in trouble. And I thought, I just wanted to see what that would look like as a realist painting. You can't see the cover, but this is Marx and Engels on the cover, so it must be the Communist Manifesto. 2 grumpy looking guys, a very cheery looking Mickey, and you can't see what my expression is. This was a painting made for the physicians, what was it? Nuclear disarmament, that's right, yeah. And so I recycled my painting from watching a man about to shoot himself in the foot. And there's this kind of idiot bravado. And then Andy Warhol died. And he wasn't about to paint my portrait, so I decided to paint some portraits of myself as if painted by Andy Warhol. And there's a shadow underneath them, painted. And my dealer came to the house, and he was not impressed. He just thought, "What are you doing? They just look like Warhol ripoffs." And he brought a photographer, and his wife came with him, and the photographer set his camera up to take pictures of those two little squares. And finally, my dealer's wife said, "Well, you know, the painting is actually that big white rectangle." And so with that little success, I made a whole bunch of them, about a dozen, which I won't show you all of them, but. Self-portrait accepting a check for the commission of this painting. And this guy was a collector from Toronto. He wanted one of my paintings. There wasn't anything available, so I had this idea that I wanted to do. Somebody else had decided they didn't want to do it, so he went for it. He came out for the photo session, we did it, and then he went back to Toronto, and his wife asked him, "So how much did you spend on art this time?" And he fibbed to her and told her it was half the amount. And then the painting arrived with the full amount on it. And they're no longer together. But anyway, he did tell me that he would had this painting hanging in his living room, facing through the living room window out onto the street, and cars used to stop all the time. In fact, one time somebody came to the door and asked what the hell was going on here. Self-portrait practicing signatures. Yes, another self-portrait. And then that was at the end of the series, and where people started talking. I go to a party and people started talking to me like I was the character in those paintings. So I decided to change things, and I began some new work. And one thing I wanted to do was doing some stenciling, because I always liked doing stenciling. There was a kick of, putting all the tape down, everything you had to do, painting it, pulling the tape off, bingo, you got the hit of the painting. So I took this image of these rings and laid it out just like that, maybe longer with longer stripes, and on a ground, and I think I put a yellow ground down, put the tape down, cut it all out, and just as I was about to paint the black, I thought, what would happen if I painted an image? So I tried it. The image didn't work, but I got an idea. So I took it, there was something about it that worked, and I did this. I took this Zurbaran painting and copied it and made this image out of it. So the process is yellow ground, tape put down, that Z again tape and cut out, and then sealed with matte medium, so all of the edges will be razor sharp. And then I painted in oil paint the still life over top, and dragged it with a brush, blurred it, and then pulled the tape off, and then this is what I got. Now I tried it after that without blurring it, and the image mashed up against the stripes. Everything was in focus, so it made it flat. So this is the space in there is by virtue of that blur. And so I just did all of the various genres: still life, landscape, some portraiture. In this case, this is a black and white image over flat areas of color that colorize the image. This one, I cut an ornate pattern out of the tape. It took more time to take all that tape out than it did to paint the image. Again, another yellow politicians, and a series of these, which are, somebody once said that the mind can't entertain two things at the same time. And so I came up with this thing of making, putting two things at the same time, so the mind, or sort of attention travels. You can look at the black cartoon face, which is quite harsh, and then you can look and see the face behind. And it's in that traveling that something else happens. And in the next step in the series was to try with a halftone. I took a tiny little halftone image, blew it up, painted it all in oil paint. It was just a mess. But so I did something else, and I changed my strategy. Pink color down, put the tape down, seal the tape, put a coat of white gesso over, and then painted the dots, the halftone dots, in with black oil paint. Drag it with a brush, done. And so that became the method for all the next work. This is about 5 feet tall. It was about from a half-inch tall image in a pulp magazine, a country and western magazine from the 50s. Some radio executive on his way to a party, a flashbulb in the face. Still life, probably a Fontaine Latour. That part of the Zurbaran. This is in the art bank, 9 feet tall. And what I did here is I painted blue stripes, and I put reddish brown as the black dots, and the whole thing appears to be purple. So it's an optical mix that's not in the painting, it's in the eye. And then a series of large heads, 9 feet by 6 feet. And then this is a show in New York at the 49th Parallel. I had the last show there before the gallery was closed down. It was a Canadian sponsored gallery by the government. And I think, what is it, early 90s, and there was money troubles in the world. So it was striped paintings, still lives, crowds, out of focus crowds. And there was a few more large heads too. And this is the last of these series, pretty much black and white hand gestures. And then this was the last one of the dot paintings for a while. I'd be making, the self-portraits took 2 to 5 months to make. These ones had to be finished in a day. And the kick here was taking the tape off at the end of the day and finishing the painting. It was like opening a Christmas present every day. Except that after 5 years of doing this, I realized I'd been painting the same dot over and over again, and I was getting tired of it. So I began some other stuff. This is a stage set that I made for a show called Breeder. What you're looking at is a big ornate frame painted on the back wall. About a foot out from it is an 8-foot panel. It's black paint with invisible blue fluorescent paint. Some of it frothed up, so I could make a landscape out of it, kind of like a Claude Lorrain landscape. That's how it looked in the just with the regular lights on. And then I painted over top of that. I painted with UV blocker, a clear UV blocker. I painted an image, and when the black lights were turned on for 1 minute in the play, this appeared, a man and a puppet. And then it went off. This is a piece I made for a rock festival in High River. The Ramones were playing, Furnace Face, Bad Brains, Violent Femmes, and 14 artists did projects here, and I got the back of the grandstand. So I made this big head, it's called Radar Head, and it's got a cage that fits on the back of it. It's got motors in it. There's black light in that long arm. There's fluorescent orange paint on the back of the plane, and so the plane flies with its own red sky, and you'll see this as it comes up. Like a silhouette. And here's, where is it? Here we go, here, coming up. Oh yes, there's about, every time it goes past the eye, about 6 feet of the, a vision tunnel lights up. Called Boat Face. And this painting, so I have, in Calgary I had got a new gallery, Trepanier Bear. The two members of the Paul Kuhn Gallery left to start their own gallery, so I went with them. And I thought, I had 2.5 months till I was going to have this next show, so I began this series of work. And it was these paintings, that was my silhouette, because I had a shaved head at the time, and it was going to go all the way around the room. I was really interested in the where they join, that sort of patterns where they join. Anyway, I started and I realized it was going to take me a year to make these paintings. So I just started doing some other stuff and doing some other stuff and doing some other stuff, and nothing happened. They were just like really bad paintings over and over and over again. Nothing was working. 2 weeks before the show, all of a sudden, I made this painting. It's it was painted from a negative, and it's a monochrome, so black paint, and I just put horizontal or vertical brushstrokes. Vertical for dark, horizontal for light, and the light, which is up at 45-degree angle, caught the light, and that's what it looked like. So I finished it, and I thought, it looks pretty good. So I went off and did something else in my studio, came back, and as I grabbed the painting, I looked at it, and it didn't look like this. It looked like this. It flipped from positive to negative. So depending where you stood relative to the painting, it was positive or negative. So I thought, well, bingo, so I began doing some other stuff with just abstract brushstrokes, top to bottom. And that has carried on for a whole long series that I return to every so often. This is a clear gel with silver enamel dragged over top of it. And underneath that is a whole, is some enamel paint, a whole other image underneath. Like this, you can sort of see through to the underlayer. Then I began using stripes, adding stripes to the paintings. This one, I finished one day. I had a studio assistant, and the next day I didn't come to my studio that day, but my studio assistant came to the studio and brought his mother to show her the new painting. And he brought her in, stood her in front of the painting, then went to turn the lights on, turned them on, and she said, "Oh, that's so beautiful," and she ran forward to touch it. And he yelled at her, and she just caught her hand on the edge. So I was able to fix most of it up, and but I left a couple of fingerprints. Archie devouring Reggie. Okay, here's where, this is where landscape started. This is a whole other interest of mine, where landscape started, over the shoulder of a sitter. And then landscape proper kind of came around with Claude Lorrain and Nicolas Poussin, even though they had these allegorical figures romping in the foreground. But I was interested in the framing devices that they used, these landscape painting, these trees at the edge, big tree, little tree, and how it directed attention into the center of the painting, but it also performed another function. It stopped the gaze from drifting too close to the edge where the illusion collapses. Sort of a safety net. And it just seemed to me that what took place in the center was a site of reverie One gazes out of, if somebody asks you a question and there's a window in the room, you want to think, you look, where do you look? You don't look at the crossbars in the window, you look at out the window at the furthest distance away where where thoughts are probably the most uncluttered. I like this one because it looks like that's just a big thought bubble. I think it's a Karachi. And in the Hudson River School with some surrogate viewers, different kind of framing device. And this was a Gladys Johnson painting. She was an artist. I collected about 40 of her paintings from when I lived in Salmon Arm. Arlene Stamp, great artist, went on to, she photocopied my collection and made large paintings from the Xeroxes that she made back in the early 80s. But I like the framing device here, just these two trees. And here's a Flexhog painting, Levine Flexhog, now about to be in a huge show, 450 works. It'll be this traveling show coming up soon with a catalog and a film. He was a guy who used to paint these paintings, almost pretty much the same painting, in the windows of Eaton's or Hudson Bay in Regina. A crowd would gather. He'd whip off the painting, take it out, sell it, whip back in and make another one. Anyway, there's thousands and thousands of these paintings and some big major collectors. David Thauberger has a couple of hundred, I think. And they were all the scenes were pretty much the same. It's painted from back to front, sky, water with house brush, then things are layered on. But this sits on top of this, sits on top of this sits on top of that. There might be a bear, there might be a cabin. In one series there's a waterfall, but pretty much it's the same all seasons of the year, color or black and white, night or day. So my framing device, I was focusing on this for a while, so I'm just going to whip through these. This one, I made a big brush curve in this painting, thinking it would bend the space, didn't do anything. I put that margin on there, bang, it immediately caused the space to happen. It needed something relative. This one I found this in a thrift store. These two paintings, I sawed an inch out of the frame of each, put them together because the water lined up. Turned into one painting with two mountains. This is a painting I made at the turn of the century, the greatest musical ever. This is called Elmer Goes for Popcorn. And this is two panels. Elmer, in fact, is not even there. That's black wall behind him. William Burroughs, this is a little quick story. A friend of mine was doing some research on Brian Geisen. He had called me and asked, who had lived in Edmonton, growing up in Edmonton. He phoned me and asked if I knew who Brian Geisen was, and I said, yeah, he's a friend of William Burroughs. And so I made this painting. He started doing this research, went down to visit Burroughs in Lawrence, Kansas, Burroughs Communications. They asked, when looking at the archive, and they asked, because Burroughs was the executor of Geisen's estate, and when he's down there, they asked if he'd like to meet Burroughs, and he said yes, and they met, they hit it off. My friend eventually went on to write the biography of Brian Geisen, but I had made this portrait of Brian Geisen for my friend, and he came and saw it, and said, oh, William would like that. And I said, well, next time you're going down, take it down to him and I'll make you another one. And in '94, he called me, January '94, and said, I've just been invited down to William's 80th birthday. I'm coming down to get the painting and take it to him. So he came and got it, and he phoned me that night and said, I just opened it up, the image up or the package up for William, and as soon as he saw the dots, he said, I made this painting before, and he ran into his studio and pulled out his portrait of Brian Geisen, which was done in the summer of '93 as well, and Burroughs was into synchronicity, and he thought they were done exactly at the same time. So this is Burroughs' painting, done with dots, pretty much the same pose, and it's yeah, signed. He signed it to me across the top, so I've got this at home. And here's a painting by Brian Geisen de Calcomani, using that ink and paint, pretty much letting nature do the work. Here's the painting by William, Alien Encounter. How are we doing?
We're running long.
Are we?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just
want to have
a walk through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's that?
Classes begin
In a half hour? Okay, I'm going to whip through. I'm just going to show you very quickly. These are framing device paintings. So just me putting an interior frame in here. That's a whole set. They start squeezing down to objects because I want to get to, that's looking more familiar. These things that began to look more like sculpture, and then this one called The Incredulous Hare at the Finish Line as a desk ornament. And that was the end of that sort of series. So I'm just going to flash through. This is a salesman with a whole bunch of paintings on the wall beside him. And let's see. I want to get to the end one, so I'm going to just go bang, 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 bang. You'll have to just watch. There we go. There's that painting. So this was in a show called Novel, and I decided I wanted to paint however I wanted. So the paintings are entirely different in terms of how they're made. This is called a disputed sculpture, and there is a disputed sculpture on the table in a motel room. Giant Chihuahua, Nobody Eyes, then the beginning of a series called the Chorus series, where these faces look over at other artworks and appropriate them. Okay, we better move along. I'm just going to zip through this stuff to get to the latest work, which is coming up. Oh, I'll just quickly show you this. This is a painting in my family home where the framing device paintings came from. I finally realized an ornate frame, so I had a 3D scan made and made these plastic objects from it, and then they wound up in things like this painting, King, yes. These are a set of Polaroids that were in my flood when my home flooded in 2005, and they came back to me dried and wrinkled, and I scanned them and made big prints. There was 9 of them, and the National Gallery just purchased these, which was very nice. And just going to zip through these ones. Here's the Chorus series, all these faces looking at, commenting on, I thought of them as a little bit like the putti, the cherubs in paintings that are looking at the main action and whispering to each other. Zip, 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 zip. And this is the show. This is a show from LA. I'm going to get to these. Okay, I'll just show you a couple of essential ones. This is one that flips from positive to negative. Fans.
Those are 3 objects, right?
Those are 3 objects.
Yeah.
Yeah. 3 objects, and this is pots and pans. This is flat, totally flat with two big objects hanging on it. It's called Mirror, and Still Life, Lemons, and this one here. That's a concrete light bulb in his thought bubble. There it is, like that. And new ones. So this is the brand new one. That's in focus, but the image is out of focus, and it's done with lines, really fine lines. And this is like an old gesture done with really fine lines, a frame, one of those frames done with really fine lines, stencils.
Does it hurt to look at?
What's that?
Can you feel it in your?
They hurt?
Yeah.
No. I like the hurt.
So they do.
Yeah, they do hurt. I've never confessed that before. Yeah, I've never confessed that before. Anyway, that's it for the. Oh, this is the painting I was mentioning. This is done before I went to art college. I painted this the mountain and the lake, and it didn't work. And then I painted this grid over top, and bang, the space. There was automatically space in there. There we go.